In March 1945, someone tried to flush the future down a toilet. Germany is bleeding out. The Third Reich is crumbling to dust under the crush of Allied boots. And floating in a shattered toilet at Bonn University are wet, torn fragments of paper. These scraps of paper aren't garbage. They are a map to hundreds of scientists, engineers, chemists, men whose knowledge may determine who controls the future. Historians would later call it one of the most consequential discoveries of the war. It is known as the Osenberg List. The Osenberg List is a catalog of Nazi Germany's top scientists, engineers, and technicians, the men who built Hitler's war machine. If you have to choose between justice for the dead and survival in the future, which do you pick? That is the question hanging in the air. The war in Europe is ending, but a new, quieter war is already breathing down our necks. The Soviets are advancing from the east. Allied armies are pushing from the west. They aren't just racing for territory, they are racing for minds. The air in the heart of Germany smells of pulverized stone. 2 years of ceaseless bombings have reduced Cologne to a heap of rubble. Major Robert B. Staver stands in the dust. He is an American intelligence agent, a Stanford engineer. He is hunting for the names on that recovered list. The stakes are absolute. A Joint Intelligence Committee report flashes a terrifying warning across desk in Washington. 8 out of 10 leading German guided missile scientists have vanished. Intelligence assumes the Soviets have them. Fear grips the military establishment. The Cold War does not officially exist yet, but everyone can feel it coming. Washington becomes convinced that supremacy over the Soviet Union must be achieved by 1952. The Nazis possessed technologies that alarm Allied intelligence agencies. In several critical fields, rocketry, jet propulsion, guided weapons, and chemical warfare, Germany has moved further and faster than many expected. They have the V-2 rocket. It is a supersonic terror weapon that falls from the very edge of space. They have swept-winged jet fighters, silent running electric U-boats, and lethal new chemical agents. Take the Me-262. It is the first combat jet fighter. Then there's the 1944 Horton HO-229. It looks like something from 50 years in the future. The aircraft uses a radical flying wing design, unlike anything fielded during the war. Its unusual shape and construction would later fuel debate among aviation historians about whether it possessed primitive stealth characteristics. Whether or not it truly deserves the title of first stealth aircraft, it demonstrates just how far German aerospace research had advanced by 1944. Look at their chemistry. A scientist named Dr. Gerhard Schrader was trying to create more effective insecticides. Instead, he stumbled onto something terrifying. In 1936, he synthesized Tabin, the world's first nerve agent. The effects were catastrophic. A drop on the skin could shut down the nervous system and kill within minutes. The Third Reich immediately recognized its military potential. Soon afterwards came sarin, developed by a team of German chemists that included Otto Ambros. These weapons were so lethal that even Nazi commanders feared using them, worried that the Allies possessed similar agents and would retaliate in kind. On May 15, 1945, the German submarine U-234 was captured off Newfoundland. Inside, Americans find plans for cruise missiles, jet fighters, and lead-lined boxes filled with 1,200 pounds of uranium oxide, the raw ingredient for atomic bombs. The Americans want the blueprints, but the blueprints are useless without the architects. Staver wants one man above all others, Wernher von Braun. Von Braun is a 32-year-old Prussian aristocrat. He is a genius, the mastermind behind the V-2 rocket. He is also an officer in the SS. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937. In May 1945, von Braun doesn't hide. The Red Army is only 100 miles away from his facility at Peenemünde. He knows what the Soviets will do to him. He decides to run west. He walks right into American lines and surrenders. He acts more like a celebrity than a prisoner of war. He knows his mind is too valuable for a hangman's noose. He tells his captors that the Americans are behind and he has what they need. But then Staver and the American investigators walk into Mittelwerk. It is an underground facility dug into the Harz Mountains near Nordhausen. The floor is slick. The air is foul. This is where von Braun's rockets were built. The assembly lines were powered by slave labor from nearby Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. The human cost is impossible to ignore. Emaciated corpses, hollow-eyed survivors. They are starving, disease-ridden, barely alive. Inmates were starved, beaten, and worked to death in inhumane conditions. SS General Hans Kammler oversaw the program, while V2 Chief Engineer Arthur Rudolph directed production operations at the facility. The bodies of those who worked too slowly were hanged at the factory entrance as a warning to the others. Over 20,000 prisoners died in the darkness of Mittelwerk. Think about that number. More people died building the V2 than were killed by its explosive impacts in London and Antwerp. Von Braun knew. He visited Mittelwerk repeatedly. He saw the conditions. He knew concentration camp prisoners were building his rockets. After the war, he would argue that he had little control over the labor system. Historians still debate the extent of his direct responsibility. What is not debated is this: his rockets were built by slave labor, and thousands died making them. But the ticking clock of the Cold War drowns out the cries for justice. The geopolitical reality is shifting rapidly. The logistical nightmare of securing this technology is staggering. Many of the most valuable Nazi technological sites sit in territories that are slated to be handed over to the Soviet occupation zone. The American armies had pushed further than expected, conquering 16,000 square miles of territory allocated to Russia. Winston Churchill begged the Americans to stay put, to use the land as leverage against Stalin, but General Dwight Eisenhower and President Harry Truman refused. They needed Soviet cooperation to finish the war against Japan. Truman agreed to pull American troops back to their designated zones by July 1st, 1945. The Americans have mere weeks to seize the future before the Red Army takes control. A frantic, haphazard rush begins. Officially, the Americans are supposed to leave the equipment untouched. They ignore the order. The treasures are simply too good to give up. Colonel Holger Toftoy orders Major James Hamel into Nordhausen. His orders are simple: empty the Mittelwerk factory before the Soviets arrive. Hamel has no official written authorization to remove the equipment. He commandeers captured German railcars anyway. The factory is in chaos. Slaves had destroyed parts. Looters had scoured the area. Critical control systems were hidden in nearby barns, schools, beer halls by retreating Germans. Hamel's men scour a 30-mile radius to find them. Hamel faces another problem. The U.S. Army Transportation Corps arrives to take his trains. Suddenly, mysteriously, the railroad tracks near Nordhausen are sabotaged with dynamite. The trains cannot be moved. It gives Hamel the time he needs to negotiate. Under the cover of darkness, his men load 100 V2 rockets onto the railcars. The last train rolls out of Nordhausen at 9:30 p.m. on May 31st. The Soviets arrive just hours later. They find the factory stripped of most of its critical control systems. Boris Chertok, a Soviet official, walks into the facility and realizes they don't have a single control instrument or engine they can use. The Americans stripped it away just hours before the Soviets arrived. Meanwhile, Major Staver is playing a dangerous game of bluff. He needs the blueprints. He tracks down Karl Otto Fleischer, a manager at the Nordhausen factory. Fleischer knows where von Braun's engineers hid the documents. Staver lies to the man's face. He tells Fleischer that von Braun is in American custody and has already confessed everything. It works. Fleischer breaks. He leads Staver to an abandoned mine near the town of Dornton. The entrance is sealed with dynamite. American soldiers dig through the debris. Inside, they find 14 tons of documents. It is the entirety of the V2 program, hidden as a bargaining chip. But Dornton is about to be handed over to the British zone in 6 days. Staver needs trucks. He hitches a ride in a P-47 Thunderbolt, squeezing behind the pilot seat, to fly to Paris and beg for transport. He gets the trucks. He returns to find British survey teams sniffing around the mine. An American officer disguises himself as a German workman. They lie to the British, claiming they are geologists looking for ore. The British leave. Staver loads the 14 tons of paper onto the trucks and drives away the very morning British forces arrived to take control of the sector. It wasn't just rockets. At the Hermann Göring Research Institute in Wolkenrode, Colonel Donald Putt discovers a goldmine of aeronautical data, swept-wing designs, wind tunnels of impossible scale. But Wolkenrode is in the British zone. Putt commandeers a B-17 and a B-24 bomber. Every night, after the British go to sleep, American trucks haul the equipment to a nearby airfield. They load the bombers and fly the technology to Ireland. By the time the British wake up, the future is gone. The Americans have the rockets. They have the blueprints. Now they need the men. President Harry S. Truman is hesitant, but he officially approves the recruitment program. However, he issues a strict, uncompromising directive. No man found to be a member of the Nazi Party and no active supporter of Nazi militarism is permitted entry into the United States. The intelligence community hits a brick wall. Almost every top scientist on their list was a member of the Nazi Party. You didn't reach the top of Hitler's scientific elite without swearing loyalty to the regime. It was impossible. By Truman's rules, Wernher von Braun, an SS officer, is a security risk and strictly ineligible. General George S. Patton thinks the order is ridiculous. He ignores it completely. The Joint Intelligent Objectives Agency and the Office of Strategic Service makes a choice. Allen Dulles, the master of espionage and future director of the CIA, pushes hard. They know that if the United States doesn't take these men, the Soviet will. So, they bypass the president. The intelligence community finds a workaround. Scientists who would normally be disqualified suddenly become eligible. Background reports are rewritten. Political affiliations are softened. SS memberships disappear from summaries. Damaging details are minimized or omitted altogether. As revised biographies are attached to personnel files, the growing program acquires a nickname: Operation Paperclip. Operation Overcast is renamed Operation Paperclip. More than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians are quietly funneled into the United States. They bypass the State Department. They are smuggled in as War Department special employees. Who exactly was being invited into America? Let's look at the men behind the sanitized files. Arthur Rudolph. He was the chief operation director at the Mittelwerk factory. Early military intelligence described him as a dangerous type and 100% Nazi. He oversaw production at Mittelwerk, where thousands of concentration camp prisoners died under brutal slave labor conditions. U.S. intelligence brings him to America. He becomes a hero of NASA. He is instrumental in building the Saturn V rocket that takes Apollo 11 to the moon. Dr. Hubertus Strughold. He is known as the father of space medicine. He was highly connected to the upper echelons of the Nazi leadership, including Hermann Göring. Before he designed NASA's life support systems, his subordinates conducted horrific human experiments at Dachau. Inmates were frozen in vats of ice water. They were locked in low-pressure chambers to simulate high-altitude sickness until they suffered seizures and died. 6 epileptic children were placed in vacuum chambers under the supervision of his institute. Strughold's name is cleared. He is brought to Texas. Dr. Kurt Blome, the Deputy Surgeon General of Nazi Germany. He experimented with bubonic plague, anthrax, and nerve agents. He infected concentration camp prisoners with diseases. He proposed using infected mosquitoes to spread malaria among Allied troops. He even possessed biological warfare data from Japan's notorious Unit 731, obtained through a dark exchange between the Axis powers. He is tried at Nuremberg. Shockingly, he is acquitted. The U.S. Army Chemical Corps quietly hires him to work on biological defense. Otto Ambros, a brilliant chemist who developed the deadly nerve agents sarin and tabun. He builds and managed chemical plants that utilize slave labor directly from Auschwitz. When inspecting the site, he found it suitable specifically because he could use the concentration camp inmates to build it. He is convicted of mass murder and slavery at Nuremberg. He doesn't serve his full sentence. He is pardoned and brought to the United States to consult on chemical weapons. Kurt Debus, a rocket launch specialist, an active SS officer. His own intelligence report stated he should be interned as a menace to security of the Allied forces. He is cleared. He eventually becomes the first director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. The shadow stretches far beyond rockets and chemistry. General Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's former head of intelligence on the Eastern Front, promises the Americans his vast spy network. He reported directly to Hitler until April 1945. He has agents inside the Soviet Union, even inside the Kremlin. The CIA's Alan Dulles embraces him. The Gehlen organization is formed. It is a spy ring staffed by former Nazis operating under U.S. guidance. The legacy of Paperclip stretches into dark corners of the Cold War. As tensions with the Soviet Union intensified, American intelligence agencies became increasingly willing to explore methods they once condemned. Programs such as Operation Bluebird and the later MK-Ultra experiments sought ways to manipulate behavior, resist interrogation, and control human cognition. The exact role individual Paperclip scientists played in those efforts remain disputed. What is not disputed is that Cold War fears repeatedly pushed American intelligence agencies into moral territory they once claimed to oppose. Hallucinogenic drugs, secret experiments, and psychological manipulation became tools of a struggle where victory often mattered more than principle. In one infamous case, Army researcher Frank Olson was unknowingly given LSD before falling to his death from a New York hotel window. The decades pass. The Cold War thaws. Wernher von Braun becomes a household name, an American icon. He is featured on Walt Disney television specials talking about the future of space travel. He looks into the camera, a symbol of progress and human achievement. The Redstone rocket is born. It is a direct descendant of the V2. Then comes the Mercury program, then Apollo. The Saturn V rocket stands 363 feet tall, an engineering marvel that dwarfs the V2. Its first stage engines generate 7.5 million pounds of thrust. On July 16, 1969, it roars to life. The United States lands on the moon. Neil Armstrong takes a step. Wernher von Braun watches from the ground. 100 of his original Paperclip staff are still with the Saturn Apollo team that day. The United States wins the space race. By almost every measurable strategic objective, the gamble worked. The knowledge of these 1,600 men, valued at over $10 billion in patents and processes, secured the American dominance. Their work influenced advances ranging from synthetic materials and magnetic recording technologies to aerospace engineering and missile systems. They shaped our ballistic missiles and our stealth bombers. But the ghosts don't sleep. Prominent voices protested Operation Paperclip from the very beginning. Albert Einstein and Eleanor Roosevelt both saw the darkness. Einstein wrote to President Truman. He warned that we were sacrificing our moral integrity. Roosevelt petitioned the government to suspend visas for all Germans for 12 years. They were right. In 1979, the Office of Special Investigations is established within the Justice Department. Their sole mission is to hunt down Nazi war criminals living on American soil. In 1982, a young lawyer named Eli Rosenbaum makes Arthur Rudolph his first major case. He opens a file. The man who helped put America on the moon is confronted with his past at Mittelwerk. He is forced to face the slaves he starved. Under the threat of prosecution, Rudolph renounces his U.S. citizenship. He quietly flees to West Germany in 1984. The secrets keep leaking out. We learned that for 50 years, the Space Medicine Association handed out its most prestigious honor, the Strughold Award. The man who oversaw freezing children in vacuum chambers was celebrated as a pioneer. It took until 2013, following a Wall Street Journal expose detailing his connection to human experiments, for the award to finally be retired. We learn about the bizarre paranoid lengths the government went to. A director within the OSI kept a piece of Joseph Mengele's scalp in his desk drawer. He held on to it, hoping the DNA would finally prove that the infamous Angel of Death never escaped to the United States. We learned that the Justice Department actively covered up the presence of war criminals. They protected Cherem Subzakov, a former Waffen-SS soldier, by lying to courts to say he had no Nazi ties. He was later assassinated by a bomb at his home in New Jersey. We learned that when the OSI was prosecuting John Demjanjuk, mistakenly identified as Ivan the Terrible, Latvian immigrants sympathetic to Demjanjuk secretly arranged for the OSI's daily trash to be delivered to them for 2 years. They dug through the garbage looking for classified documents to help him. A secret 600-page report is drafted by the Justice Department. Mark Richard, a senior lawyer, spends years compiling the dark truth of American complicity. The government buries it. Richard is dying of cancer. He begs for it to be released. They refuse. It takes a lawsuit and the New York Times to finally drag the heavily redacted pages into light. The report admits the brutal truth. America, which prided itself on being a safe haven for the persecuted, became, in some small measure, a safe haven for the persecutors as well. In the end, nobody got everything they wanted. The victims never got full justice. The scientists got new lives. The United States got the moon. Operation Paperclip asks a question that still has no comfortable answer. If your enemy possesses the knowledge that could determine the future of civilization, and that knowledge lives inside the men responsible for unspeakable crimes, what do you do? The United States chose victory. The Soviet Union would have done the same. The moon landing, the space race, modern rocketry, Cold War military dominance, all of it traces back, in part, to a decision made in the ruins of Nazi Germany. A decision hidden beneath altered files, buried beneath classified reports, held together by a simple paperclip. And for the thousands who died in the tunnels beneath Mittelwerk, that paperclip never stopped casting a shadow. Subscribe if you're the kind of person who can't leave a question unanswered. Turn off the lights. The path ahead is dark, and the woods are deep. Do not walk them alone. Subscribe to stay in the light, or click the video on your screen to wander deeper into the shaded divide. We will be waiting.